Hi everyone, welcome to another SearchPilot webinar. You just got me this week, Will Critchlow, founder and CEO at SearchPilot, and I wanted to take some time to talk through some aspects relating to AI search and what we're calling generative engine optimization, or GEO. In particular, if you take one thing away from today, it's that at scale, we want to stop guessing and start testing. Let's take a look. There are two big divides in the SEO world right now. The first is what to call AI search optimization. The old MacDonald had a farm of AI GEO. And regardless of what we call it, whether, isn't this just SEO? We're going to cover mainly the second point. My good friend Mike King shared an article from New York Magazine about the SEO dying yet again, and had a good take on the way that GEO is reaching into the consciousness of executives and leadership and large organizations. And I'll come down on this side that it's worth having a name for it. And I think GEO is the best. We have generative engine optimization. I think it works better than the other alternatives. That's what we're going to call it for now. Isn't it just SEO? We're going to get to that. Before we do, what we're going to cover today is, broadly speaking, these four areas. So how LLMs work in e-commerce discovery, how to run experiments in GEO, whether it's just SEO, and what some real GEO hypotheses might look like. So the first of these, how does it work? The large language models, whichever one they are, whether it's ChatGPT, whether it's Claude, whether it's underpinning something like Perplexity or Google's AI mode, the model has knowledge that it, quote, learned during the training phase of the model. This is where, broadly speaking, they try and ingest every piece of human knowledge that's ever been published and do a load of complicated statistics and maths on it in order to be able to bake in the kind of core, you can think of it as intelligence of the model. Now, of course, in making that intelligence, it does learn some facts and it does have some knowledge. But the trend is towards trying to make it smarter, more intelligent, not necessarily more knowledgeable, because what counts as knowledge changes over time and is always getting updated. And most of the conversations we have with these models rely on some awareness of the world and what's going on. And during those conversations, the model can get fresh knowledge kind of piped in. And this is called retrieval augmented generation, when they generate new content based on what they've gone to out into the world to retrieve. And it's how these models stay up to date with news, new information, changes to everything around them. And the primary source of this RAG is search, and it's the main opportunity for performing e-commerce GEO. Because what we know from, well, at this point, 25 years plus of Google search is that when it comes to product searches, especially, but really for all kinds of search, freshness is really, really important. And in e-commerce search in particular, having up-to-date information about price, special offers, stock levels, latest reviews, even what is even out there in the market, right? Which models have been released, or what new features are available. All of this is critical, and you can't rely on something that was trained 6, 12, 18 months ago for up-to-date information. And so increasingly, these tools and these technologies are getting that information from their RAG. And the primary source of the RAG, as I said, is from search, and it's this concept of fan-out queries. So the idea of a fan-out query is, it takes a little bit of getting your head around, but it's essentially the model doing its own searches to find the information it needs to better respond to your prompt, your question, your conversation. So for example, here, I pulled up a made-up example prompt. If I'm asking for best hiking boots for a trip to the Swiss Alps in the spring, where I'll be walking around 10 miles a day, that isn't a good single search query. There's probably not a single page on the internet that exactly matches that you can retrieve in an old-fashioned information retrieval sense and point me to the page and I'll be satisfied. So what the models do instead is that they perform these fan-out queries. These are just examples that I made up, but they're kind of representative of this idea that the model is doing queries to fill in the gaps in its knowledge and information. So it might look for the weather in the Swiss Alps at that time of year, what the trail conditions would be, learn more about different alternatives for the hiking boots that I've asked about, and then it might even get into pros and cons of specific different models. And it can do this somewhat iteratively based on the information that it gets back. And what they get back probably varies between the different tools. We don't actually know. This is very much behind the scenes in the inner workings. Could be anything from just the list of URLs to full page content to even, I mean, especially in a tightly integrated case like Google, it could be even more than a searcher would normally receive, right? It could include PageRank or trustworthiness type information and even more information about these pages that Google knows as well. And as I say, we don't actually know that. That's all within this kind of hidden black box of how the system works. But they get this information back, and at the very least, they get the URLs, right? So they know what these pages are. And they can also access pages. And so the systems can go and visit your website in real time and other websites and gather more information to make their response to you better, more powerful, more compelling. In some cases, they can do that directly and they can execute JavaScript. We know for sure that some of them execute directly but don't execute JavaScript. So we're back to 2006 era SEO, where it matters what's in the HTML source code of the page. And if you're pulling async information in with JavaScript or relying on JavaScript to render the page, then that may be invisible to at least some of these tools. And I suspect, though don't know, that in some cases they get it direct from the cache. So in the case of Google Gemini, particularly AI mode, where it's tightly coupled and integrated, I suspect that there is not an additional request to the origin page, that in fact it's getting that information from previous crawls and probably rendering of those pages that have been done during the regular web crawl. But wherever it comes from, the model gets this additional information at conversation time. And there's then one crucial next step, which is part of where my spoiler alert differences between SEO and GEO might come into play. And that is that it's not just an AI-powered search engine. So it's not just looking at all these different fan-out queries, all these different pages, and then presenting you with an ordered list of links. What it's doing is it's taking all of this information from all of these places, from its own knowledge, from the retrieval augmented generation step, and it's doing a whole load of stuff to it. And again, we don't know exactly, but we know from the academic literature some of the steps that are happening here, including stripping unnecessary information out of the page, right? They don't care about your navigation and those kinds of things. Potentially chunking the page, so breaking it down into manageable on-topic sections. Ingesting some of these, depending on how relevant they are, some of these chunks, ingesting them into the context window of the model, and then generating new content for you to output and for you to read and engage with, and then augmenting that back with references to the sources of where it came from, in some cases. And one of my theories that makes me bullish about both Google and the future of AI-powered discovery is that I think, especially in Google's case, and I think Google has a big opportunity to be the dominant form of AI discovery, the trend is going to be towards more and more links out in this stuff, and more compelling links. And in particular, it kind of almost selling you on the idea that you should visit these particular pages. I think it's good for the system, and I think it's good for the user, and I think Google is the one that has the most incentive to have things operate in that way. My brother, Tom Critchlow, has written about this, and I can link out to it in the update. But point being, it's not simply a search engine powered by AI. So it's not simply gathering this information and giving you a list of links. It's creating new content from scratch based off all of this information that it's taken in, and then augmented again with some links. out. And this step adds a bit of complexity to how we optimize ourselves as brands or as retailers for being more likely to be recommended by these platforms. So how do we run experiments in this world? Well, the first thing to say is that the approach that we're building out here at SearchPilot is there are some key similarities with SEO testing and some key differences. The things that are, broadly speaking, the same is the core mechanism. So when we take a group of pages to run an experiment on, we will have some pages that are unchanged as the control and some pages that are modified as the variant, based on the hypothesis that we have that this particular change to the page is going to benefit the users and the visibility, and ultimately the clicks and the purchases through AI search. And in general, the testing ground is the same. So the pages where we're applying these hypotheses in an e-commerce world, PLPs and PDPs, right? The listing and detail pages, so your category pages and your product pages, are the places that are most scalable, where most of your traffic and visibility comes, whether it's an AI world or a regular search world. And so this part is kind of the same. What's different is that users do more of their journey within the context of the conversation. So instead of doing a whole load of different searches, and then at the very end of that process, doing a commercial click buy process, it seems intuitively true, and from what we're seeing in the data, it seems quite likely that the way users do this is that they have more of the back and forth with the model in a conversation, and the click to you only comes later down the funnel, closer to purchase point, and when the user has had more of that information provided to them, and they've done more of the refining, more of the attention has gone in within that platform, within that walled garden. And so we're kind of testing against more of the user journey at once. I've heard this referred to as there are fewer clicks, but those clicks are more valuable. And of course, there's some tactical details. So instead of looking at Google organic search traffic, for example, we might be running tests against traffic from ChatGPT, just as a case in point. And two caveats here. One is we're at the kind of cutting edge, bleeding edge of this. Only some sites are at a scale and in an industry where actually they're getting enough traffic from the large language models to run these kind of tests statistically yet. And obviously, if you're not getting that much traffic, it's also probably not that material to the business just yet. The reason why we're talking about it now is it's growing very quickly. It's clearly an interesting, exciting technology, and it's gathering the attention of a lot of folks in the SEO industry, but a lot of folks in the retail and e-commerce industries, and in particular in leadership. And I would say you're probably at this point in the minority if you haven't had a question from on high asking you, what's your plan for AI-powered discovery in the business? And the other thing I should say is that we're talking here about what you can do on your website. And that's kind of my area of expertise. That's my specialism. But there are, of course, other aspects of this that might come into play in the longer run. So things that look more like PR, getting coverage in media, getting reviews posted more widely, getting coverage, getting positive sentiment, all kinds of things that are outside the scope of what we're talking about today. So I wanted to share an updated version of this flowchart, that the link's there, but we've published this previously on the SearchPilot website. And this is essentially articulating what makes a valid SEO hypothesis. So an idea, a thing that you might want to test. And SEO hypotheses can be pretty wide-ranging. Some of them are very, very classic, I want to put the keyword in the title tags kind of change. But it could range all broadly across everything from user experience to site speed to, there's a whole range of potential kinds of hypotheses. But crucially, it's got to move one of these three levers. In order to improve your SEO performance, a change has to either target new keywords, improve the rankings for existing keywords that you already rank for, change the appearance in the search results in such a way that you get more clicks for the same ranking position. And of course, it can do more than one of these, but it must do at least one. So if it does any one or more of those things, it's a valid SEO change. And so a hypothesis that a particular change might do one of those things means that it's a valid SEO hypothesis. But if it's going to do none of those things, and if you don't have a hypothesis that it's going to do any of those things, then it's not. And so the updated version of this for GEO is quite similar. It either needs to lead to you ranking better for new fan-out keywords that you didn't previously rank for. It needs to improve rankings in fan-out queries where you were already present. It needs to change the summary information returned to the LLM in the fan-out. Or it needs to actually improve the page in such a way that when the LLM consumes the actual page content, it's helpful in it producing the answer for the user. And so the top three of these are very similar to their SEO equivalents. And then there's one that maybe looks a little bit more like traditional conversion rate optimization, about making the page useful and helpful in some ways. But of course, instead of being directly useful to the user, it's about being useful to the system, the LLM system, so that that system can make something more useful for the user using your material, referencing you, making it more likely that it's your products, your retail store that gets recommended. And so let's just run through these top three. The new fan-out keywords is kind of equivalent to a new keyword rankings in a regular SEO world. Improving fan-out rankings is similar to improving existing rankings in a regular SEO world. And the summary improvement is similar to improving the appearance in search results in such a way that you get a better click-through rate. In a GEO world, we don't really know how much difference it makes where you rank in the fan-out query. It may just be kind of binary. You're in there or you're not. We don't know. This is exactly why we're going to have to run experiments on this kind of data. It seems likely that there would be some heavier weight placed to things that rank more highly in the fan-out queries. At the very least, part of the point of doing that search is to get authoritative, up-to-date information. And you would imagine that if you trust your search partner, and or in Google's case, it's obviously tightly coupled, that you're going to think more highly of the things that rank more highly. But we don't know, and that's part of what makes this all super exciting. And then the one that's different is, as I say, about the page being convincing and useful, remembering that we're being convincing and useful to the large language model so that it can make more compelling content for human users. And this last one, let's just take a moment to understand the mechanism here. So as I said, this is about when the page is looked at directly by the large language model. And if you remember, that could be direct access with or without JavaScript, or it could be coming from a cache of some kind, most likely Google cache. But that the critical part here is that it undergoes transformation through this process. It's not just that the URL gets thrown into the output, and it's not just the case that the whole page content gets necessarily ingested as it is. This is the bit where, if you've read people working from first principles in GEO, so they've read the academic literature and those kinds of things, they'll be talking about things like chunking, which is the idea that the context window is going to be much more powerful if it's kept on topic and it's kept narrowly focused. And so I think a lot of what's happening here is pruning and modifying the content that comes in through the RAG so that it is in a form that is valuable and useful to the model. And there are certain arguments or certain reasons to believe that if you do some of that work for them by having logical chunks, for example, and separations of these things, and you make it consistent and easy to do that, that the model will find it easier to do that, and therefore more likely to use your source data versus your competitors or media companies or whatever else it might be. And that this is where lots of the ideas that nobody really knows yet come into play. You know, how important are things like schema, structured data, those kinds of things could go either way. It's possible that stuff is stripped out and the model never sees it. It's possible that it's there in the initial RAG response, right? That they get something that looks a little bit like a rich snippet, and so they get some of that information. It's possible that they ingest the raw HTML of certain pages in certain circumstances, and they get that structured data, and actually the structured data is helpful directly to the model. I think not only do we not know, but it could be different for different systems. The way ChatGPT works could be different to Claude, could be different to Gemini, could be different to AI mode. So this is where we're going to have to experiment, is the case I'm arguing. So having covered all of that, we have this debate. Is GEO just SEO? SEO in a trench coat, you might say. And I'm going to put both sides and leave you to decide. I will give you my opinion, but the case for yes, they're the same. SEO is GEO are, firstly, most of the actual activities that you do on your website to improve it so that you do better in ChatGPT, for the sake of argument. Those things are very similar to things you do for ranking better in Google. And in fact, they almost entirely overlap. The set of things you could do to improve one, you might do to improve the other. We'll get onto the subtleties in a minute, but broadly speaking, improving different bits of your page, they're kind of doing the same thing. Most of the ways that you end up doing better by improving those pages is actually in a form of search. You do better by ranking better in the fan out queries. And isn't that just SEO? You know, that you're ranking better in those fan out queries, whether they're performed on Google or Bing or accessed via some connector API. Fundamentally, you're still doing SEO in those cases. And possibly the strongest argument is I think a lot of people think it should be owned by the SEO team. At the very least, and I would agree with this part of the argument, it is part of SEO. GEO, I think, is a specific subset of SEO. It is not everything we do, but equally it is so closely coupled, so similar, and so aligned and impossible to do independently of SEO that it should fall within the remit of an SEO team. But there are arguments to say it is at least not the same thing as SEO, and in particular that you need to do some things differently when you prioritize performing in these channels and you are contrasting the performance in these channels with your performance in regular search. So the first is that there are new mechanisms. So all of that stuff that we were talking about around chunking, the way that the model ingests your page and processes it before turning it into the output that the user sees, that step doesn't happen in SEO. I mean, as I said, there is a possible analogy between essentially what happens in the user's brain when they read your content in a normal SEO environment. But I think it's actually a little bit more akin to a kind of computer CRO. And that mechanism, those activities, those are new. It is possible, both for that reason and because of all of the fan-out complexity and everything else, it's possible to imagine specific changes that you might make to your website that are good for one and bad for the other, good for SEO and bad for GEO, good for GEO and bad for SEO. And we don't really have the tools and language for that yet. And nobody's done enough of these experiments that I'm evangelizing to really know how true or how real that is. But it's at least theoretically possible. It's at least theoretically possible that you end up ranking better for a whole bunch of fan-out queries, which humans very rarely do, but influence the generative output. But in the process of doing that, you ended up doing a bit worse on the kinds of things that actually humans search for. And so you rank less well, get less traffic, get fewer conversions in a kind of regular SEO sense. And probably the easiest analogy is that you can imagine doing things differently for different search engines. And of course, you would say both those things for SEO, that when you do something for Bing or you do something for Google and it's good for one, bad for the other, you're looking at the net impact and so forth. But I think there is more of a case that tools like ChatGPT are not search engines, even though people are doing searches on them. And therefore, it is possible to imagine this divergence being real. So my hot take, my spicy hot take, is that if you are guessing, then broadly speaking, yeah, SEO is the same as GEO. You're trying to make your website better. You're doing it in intuitive ways based off best practices, things you've read and first principles and information retrieval, research and so forth. But unless you're running real experiments, you're just doing those things and hoping that it's going to work in both parts of this channel, that it's going to work for regular search and it's going to work for AI search. And you may very well, on average, be right, but you're not going to be able to say, well, my schema markup is good for Google and made no difference to ChatGPT. It's going to be impossible to tell. Or my reordering of the page so that the content is chunked better, that I hoped was going to improve my performance in the large language models and be neutral for Google because all the content is still there. Again, if you're guessing, then you don't know. So you're just, yes, you are just doing these things for both SEO and for GEO. And so I think we may find in the coming weeks, months, and years that if you are testing, we might find these differences. We might find these things where we can say, doing this was beneficial for search and either didn't work or was negative for large language model retrieval, or vice versa. And in those cases, I think it'd be valid to say, this is a GEO tactic, this is an SEO tactic in a particular situation, in a particular environment for a particular site. And I think this is probably where I'm at. It's a niche, it's a specialism, it's a little bit like local search or image search or whatever else. It is worth having a name for it because the tactics may differ and the results may differ, but it is not to say that it is distinct from SEO. It is a subset of and a kind of a form of SEO. So I wanted to round out by thinking a little bit about what the hypotheses might look like in a GEO world. And as I said, we're only in the earliest days of doing this. We have the capability at SearchPilot, and a number of our customers are at the scale where they are seeing sufficient traffic coming from these new channels that we're beginning to run these experiments. And very soon, I hope to have some that we can talk about publicly and where I can give you some case studies and test results, just like we do in our regular SEO work. And if you're interested in all that stuff, you should sign up at searchpilot.com for our newsletter and for our test results bi-weekly email, because there's definitely going to be some AI stuff coming for you in there. But let's look at some of these specific hypotheses. So we're in an e-commerce world here, and what we're talking about is, for example, thinking about a product detail page, we might have a goal where we want to be have our products be chosen and recommended in AI generated comparisons. So this is the idea that when somebody turns to AI mode, or they go to ChatGPT, or they go to Perplexity, and they ask for recommendations for the product category that our specific products live in, then we would like ours to be recommended more often, more highly, more enthusiastically by these large language models. And we want to do that on average across conversations, across the different ways people ask for these things, across the different histories that they have and different personalizations that they have, the different situations they're in, the different ways that they have of phrasing it, the different priorities that they might have. And we obviously hope that our products stand up in the marketplace, right? They're differentiated and attractive and well priced and all the other things that merchandising and product takes care of. And we want all of that to come through so that we are the right answer more often, we're recommended as the right answer more often, and ultimately more of those users end up coming to our site and purchasing. And so an example of a hypothesis, we might say we're going to try reformatting our product specifications into a scannable key features summary at the top of the PDP. This, we hypothesize, is going to help generative engines more frequently cite our product when they're comparing them, and it's going to lead to an increase in those clicks that are highly commercial and that lead people hopefully to purchase the products from our site. And you can ask some whys. You can say, why might this work? It might work because of the chunking kind of element. It might work because of ranking better in some of those fan out queries. So when it does a fan out related to comparison type queries, then this might help us rank better. That's classic SEO, but we don't know if the search volume would be there for these things. So it may be the case that there isn't enough search volume for the things that we rank better for to make it worth doing this for regular SEO. but maybe there is for the large language model aggregation and RAG process. So this is a kind of example of a hypothesis that we might have on a product detail page. On a product listing page, what we might call a category page, we might have a goal to be the preferred source for category level information. So when a model is gaining information about multiple products within a category and doing its own comparison, and so the example kind of things you could imagine turning to ChatGPT to ask where the best place to buy 4K TVs under £1,000, then we could have a hypothesis that said that we're going to try adding a particular kind of content to our category pages. We're going to have an authoritative introductory paragraph that describes our position in the market and in particular our product range as a whole and the benefits of buying from us and so forth. And that we hypothesize that as a result, some of these models will use our page as the primary source or as a more influential source when answering these kind of best of conversations, queries, and that this is going to lead to us being cited more often and lead to an uplift in that high intent traffic to the entire category. And we can measure that potentially both on the category level pages and on the product pages that are within that category. And this is the kind of thing that might look a little bit more like an internal linking test in pure SEO world. So I'm not suggesting these are going to work necessarily. That's why they're hypotheses. I'm not suggesting they're the only kinds of things that we might wish to test. But they're examples. And I hope that they trigger ideas for you of things that may or may not be SEO hypotheses, but are hypotheses that you have for this generative engine world. And what the approach that we're looking to take for this is what we call multi-metrics, which is that we decide that we have a hypothesis and it could potentially move one of three needles, for example. It might move impressions, it might move regular search clicks, and it might move LLM referrals. And we can run experiments on each of those things and report on positive, negative, neutral on each kind of source of traffic. And so that's what we're talking about when it comes to GEO A/B testing. So the final spicy take I'm going to leave you with is the internet is full of spicy takes about GEO right now. If my LinkedIn feed is anything to go by, you can't swing a cat without reading another take of what works, what doesn't in generative engine optimization. But most of them are guessing. And I am very definitely trying not to guess here. So I don't know whether schema works or not for generative engine optimization. I don't know whether chunking actually makes a difference. I know that it is part of the process for some of these models in a theoretical sense, but does it actually help you perform better if you try and set your pages up for better chunking? Well, I don't know. And I don't think anybody does just yet. So that's really the evangelizing that I'm doing today. I'm hoping that not just with SearchPilot, but also with SearchPilot, folks are going to stop guessing and start testing. And if you're interested in doing more of that, you can go deeper. I've written a detailed article about how GEO testing works. And if you don't want to wait around to get the slide deck to get that clickable link, you can scan the QR code here and read the whole article entitled Stop Guessing and Start Testing. And I look forward to hearing your stories, your examples, and your questions. And you can find me at Will Critchlow on Twitter or at SearchPilot for the company. Head to searchpilot.com to sign up to the email newsletter and to get email case studies in your inbox every other week. As I say, you're going to start seeing AI-powered ones in there as well. And we'll find the answer to that question of whether GEO is just SEO after all. Take care.